On the night before Christmas, back when I was 11, I remember waking up in the middle of the night with anticipation. This was normal for me every year. I was always the first person in my family that was awake. That year was the first time, though, that I wished I had just stayed in bed for a few more hours. I sat up and turned on the small TV at the end of my bed to try to pass the time, but like most kids at that age, I couldn't think about anything other than my presence. I watched TV for a couple of minutes and then I muted it as fast as I could because I thought I heard something. Silence filled the air as I did my best to listen calmly. But when I heard someone walking around in the living room, I couldn't contain myself. I figured that it was either my mom or dad and that I could get a head start on Christmas if I ran out of my room while they were awake. I hopped out of bed and opened my bedroom door before running out into the living room, excitedly yelling, "Merry Christmas!" Only I didn't get the whole phrase out before I stopped myself. Once I was far enough down the hallway to see the tree and all of the presents, I also got a look at the person in the living room, and it wasn't my parents. I stopped in the middle of the hallway and my eyes got wide as a strange man, dressed in all black, stood up straight and turned to see me. I tried to call out for help, but I couldn't find my voice as the man turned toward me and started walking forward. He reached out with black gloves on his hands, and through his thick, dark beard, I could see his horrifying smile. He started to shush me as he got closer and went to pull his hands on my shoulder. But before he could touch me, I finally managed to scream. He pulled away from me for a second. I thought I surprised him. But once he realized that my parents were going to wake up, he came at me again. The man grabbed me by the back of the neck with one hand and then placed his other over my mouth as he told me to shut it. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes as I tried to get away from him, but he had a strong grip on me that I couldn't squirm out of. I had no idea what the man was planning on doing with me. He clearly didn't expect to get caught, so he started looking around frantically. After a minute of holding my mouth shut, the strange man finally looked back at me and told me that if I stayed quiet, he would just grab his bag and leave. He said if I made even a single noise, though, he was going to hurt me and whoever else was home. And I believed him, so I shook my head yes in agreement and planned on letting the man just take our stuff and leave. Thankfully, though, my dad must have heard the man talking or maybe even been woken up by my scream. But as soon as the man let me go, my parents' bedroom door swung open and my dad came charging out. He grabbed me and pushed me into the hallway toward my mom, who pulled me into their bedroom and then chased the man out of the house. The police came a little while later and made sure that the guy wasn't hiding anywhere close by, and they also realized that he hadn't grabbed his bag before my dad chased him. In the bag, they found a few of the presents that my parents bought me along with some other stuff from our neighbor's house. The officers checked on my neighbors and they were fine. They actually didn't know that anyone had been in their house. And come to think of it, I wouldn't have known either had I not woken up for Christmas. All I know is that after that, my parents come into my room to wake me up on Christmas, not the other way around. It was Christmas Eve, and my wife and I just put our son Ethan to bed. We had a lot to get done that night, including wrapping a lot of the gifts that we got for him and setting it up to look like Santa had come by, so I wasn't paying much attention to my phone. When I finally got a chance to look at it, I was surprised to see that our neighbor from across the street had texted me. I thought it was weird because he had never really reached out through text, but I figured that he must have been busy. The text said, "Hey John, my wife wanted me to ask you where you got your Santa from, and if you could give us an estimate, we'd like to hire him next year." I had no idea what he was talking about. "What Santa are you talking about?" I responded. And a few minutes later he replied by saying, "The one that stopped by before. My wife said she saw a guy dressed like Santa on your porch. We assumed you hired him to visit Ethan. Can you send me a link to the website you used?" I was really confused because I didn't hire anyone to visit the house. We didn't have the money for anything like that at the time. I asked my wife if she knew what they were talking about, but she had no idea. We tried to figure out who it could have been, but we got nothing. Eventually, my wife said that it was probably just a Santagram or something that one of our coworkers or friends set up as a joke, and we must have missed it. We got back to wrapping the presents when we both heard a noise coming from Ethan's room. I thought it was just my son moving around in his bed, but just in case, I wanted to check on him. I didn't want to risk him coming into the living room and seeing all of his presents and ruining Christmas. I walked down the hallway and slowly opened the door to his room, and I saw that he was still in bed. I looked over to the nightstand where he left his note for Santa. As I was working out the best way to sneak into his room and take it, I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I turned my attention to Ethan's window, but nothing was there, or nothing that I could see at first. I kept looking at the window for a minute and noticed 2 little fog marks on it, almost as if someone's face had been up against it. I tried to convince myself that Ethan most likely just got up and looked out the window to see if it was snowing, but just to be safe, I wanted to check it out. I walked to the front door and told my wife that I was just going to walk around the house real quick before stepping out into the darkness. We didn't have time to decorate much, so the only light around was coming from the Christmas lights and lawn ornaments across the street. I walked around the house toward Ethan's window, but I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. I made my way around the rest of the house, making sure to check the shadows for anything that may have been hiding. Even though I didn't see anything, by the time I made it to the back door, I could feel my heart racing. I finished checking the yard as fast as I could and then headed back inside, happily thinking that everything was all right. My wife and I finished everything that we had to do and then got ourselves ready for bed. It was already 2 a.m., and we knew that we would be woken up by Ethan soon since he liked to get up at 5 in the morning every year on Christmas. But that didn't stop us from trying to get a few hours of sleep. I closed my eyes for a while, hoping to get tired enough to pass out, but after a little while, I was forced out of bed by my cell phone ringing. I left it on the dresser on the other side of the room, so by the time I walked over to it, the call had already ended. I looked at the phone and saw that it was my neighbor again. But before I could check if I had missed any messages, he was calling again. I answered and asked him if everything was all right, but was horrified when he said no. I asked him what was wrong, but before I could get the words out, he was telling me to call the police. What? I asked. Call the police. I forgot to unplug the lights and just went outside and saw him by your window. I turned to look at my wife and mouthed to her to call 911. I asked my neighbor who was by my window as I made my way out of the bedroom. That was when he told me that he saw a man dressed like Santa standing outside of Ethan's window. I was about to walk out of the front door, but quickly turned and ran down the hall to check on my son. I opened his door as fast as I could and was shocked when I saw him sitting on his bed putting his boots on. "What are you doing, buddy?" I said as I rushed in and sat in front of him. He looked at me and said that Santa told him that they were going to the North Pole and to go out into the yard to see the sleigh. I looked over to the window and saw that it was all fogged up again. That's when my wife came into the room. She was on the phone with the police who were heading to our house. By the time they got there, though, the man in the Santa suit was nowhere to be found. My neighbor said that he saw him running down the road and then shortly after saw an old SUV drive by really quickly. Other than that, though, there was no sign of him. The police terrifyingly explained to us that we were lucky that our neighbor called. If Ethan had gone outside, there's a very real chance that man could have taken him without us even knowing. I'm not a religious person, but Christmas Eve Mass has always been a big deal for my mom. So every year I try to go with her to make her happy, even after what happened back in 2016. I had just dropped my mom back off at her house after Mass and decided to stop by the local 24-hour diner before going back to my apartment. I checked my phone while I ate and saw that a package that I was waiting for finally got delivered by Amazon earlier that day. I was pretty excited because I finally ordered myself a new computer for Christmas and was planning on opening it a day early. So when I finished eating, I didn't waste any time getting into my car and heading back to my house. The roads were pretty empty, as they usually are on Christmas Eve, but all of the lights on the houses made the drive feel a bit less dreary. They also lit up the driveway to my apartment pretty well. At the time, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment on the first floor of a house that had been divided into 3 apartments. That means I was used to getting home and finding that someone had parked in my spot. so I wasn't too surprised when I couldn't pull into the driveway because it was already full. I did my best to find a good spot on the street out in the front of the apartment to park, and then started gathering my things to walk inside. When I stepped out of the car, though, I saw that there was something moving around on my front porch. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but once my eyes adjusted a bit, I could see someone walking away from my front door. They walked down the stairs and toward the driveway. I didn't say anything at first because I couldn't see who it was, but once they stepped into the lit-up driveway, I noticed that they had a package in their hand. "Yo!" I yelled out as I slammed my door shut and started walking over to the driveway. I looked at the guy and told him that I thought he had my package, and asked if I could look at the name on it. He didn't say anything though, he just looked at me. "Do I know you, man?" I asked him since I couldn't see his face behind the scarf he had wrapped around his head. Again, he stayed silent. That was when I took another step forward and reached my hands out to grab the package from him because I was certain that it was my new computer. The man took a step back and pulled the package away from me. And before I could try to reach for it again, I felt the car door that I was standing next to slam into my back. I was pushed forward by the force of the door and turned around to see another 2 guys had gotten out of the car that was taking up my parking space. I backed up from the group and tried to keep everyone calm. I told them that I thought everything was just a misunderstanding. I just wanted my package back. They weren't interested in anything that I was saying, though. Before I knew it, the man with the package was making his way to the other side of the car, and the 2 guys who stepped out were lunging toward me. I tried to protect my face after being thrown to the ground, but I couldn't do anything to stop them from stomping down on me. It felt like someone was literally jumping up and down on my rib cage before the pain ended up making me pass out. I'm not sure what happened between that moment and the time that I woke up, but by the time my eyes slowly opened, their car was gone, and so was mine. I struggled to get up from the driveway and began looking around for my keys. They took everything. They got my keys, my wallet, and my phone. I stumbled over to the porch that the man had taken my package from and fumbled around for the spare key that I kept outside before calling the police. I reported everything that the men had stolen and described the car that was sitting in the driveway. But the officer I spoke with was honest and said that the likelihood of me getting the package back was small. Honestly, though, I was more concerned about the car by that point. The officer explained that I was lucky to be alive. He said he worked a robbery gone wrong last Christmas that was very similar, only the victim didn't make it out of the altercation alive. Ever since that year, I've learned to severely limit the amount of packages I get around the holiday.